Hi everyone, welcome to another project. This is Marina from Frocks Frolics and I'm going to show you how to make a Sophia dress. This is one of many that I made and it's my favorite. So I'm going to talk you quickly through a few things that you have to know in order to make this beautiful dress. So this is my favorite dress of all the ones I've made. I have a thing for it, I have to say. I've bound the edges of the dress on the neckline and on the armhole, which I think is really, really nice. And then, as you can see, I'm quite short. So the dress length here, I'm 5'2", is perfect for me. It just ends above the knee. But if you're taller, you might want to add a little bit to the length of the dress. You will also notice that this dress sits rather snug compared to the one that I made for the instructions, which was in 100% cotton. And that's because this one is a polyester and elastane mix. I think it might have a little bit of cotton in it, but I don't think very much at all. So it has wonderful recovery because it is a synthetic fiber. So now let's have a look at the same dress in 100% cotton. And this is the dress, same size in 100% cotton. You can see that it's much, much looser. I've got tons of room in here. And also it sits way more on the shoulder. Now the reason for that is that the binding on this dress was particularly loose because I didn't realize how bad the stretch recovery would be. And so what I've done for your instructions is I've actually made a column on the binding length for a cotton with very bad stretch recovery because they are very common, and this is from Birch Fabrics. It's an organic cotton which I absolutely adore. It is super comfortable, so I can see you going out and getting stuff from them as well. You can get this at Fabric Worm. It's ace. But be aware that you need the much shorter length of the binding. Don't accidentally cut it too long, because what you don't want is that when you bend over that everybody can see in. You want it to curve in, and I've only just managed to do that here with that longer length binding. So bear in mind, when you're making it in 100% cotton, you need the shorter length binding from your chart, and also it probably will look a whole size bigger than you actually intended to be. But I quite like it. Let's have a look at the same size again in a cotton lycra mix, and I'm using a different technique. Same dress again. This time cotton lycra mix, and I would say that this is probably right in the middle between the one I made in polyester and the one I made in cotton. This is super comfy. I've got a little bit more room in it, and I've done something else different here. As you can see, I've used the binding a little bit differently. What I've done is I simply sewed it on and then overlocked it here, and that's it, and then top stitched it. And when I do this, this is done with interlock, and that is a very, very stable knit fabric. And obviously I didn't need this to be quite so tight, so if you're using interlock for the binding, you can take that looser column of binding and maybe actually make it a couple of centimeters, so 4 centimeters longer for each side. Yeah, so we need that woo going around the neckline at 4 centimeters if you're doing interlock, because this is almost too tight. The other thing that you need to do, of course, if you want to do this method, is you need to reduce the seam allowances here, because you don't want those on, otherwise it'll look really frumpy. I'm going to talk you through that in a minute as well, but before we do, I want to show you one more method, and we're going to take a trip down memory lane for me. Now this dress I made quite a while ago, and it's a whole size too small, so I don't get to wear this a lot anymore. But what I've done here is I've lined the whole lot. This is very nice if you want to make a special occasion wrap dress. What I've done is I've used a very light white, in this case cotton, so this Italian lovely jersey wouldn't have been too see-through. And again, that's one thing that I think it looks really great if you do a 2-layer. So you do a shorter and a longer one. If it's in the same fabric like Frida did, I think that looks absolutely fantastic. It's really lovely. And then for the lining, I've lined it here, but you can see that the armhole is way lower. I'm going to compare that in a minute. I'm going to show you how it does compare to the red dress. because the armhole height of both dresses in the pattern should have been the same, but you'll see that this is much lower because it's just been lined and just stay stitched. Some of you might like the lower armhole. I think the important thing is that it covers your bra, so you can play around with this, you know, really have fun. And so it wouldn't be too thick down there. What I've done, it's a bit ingenious, I've also lined it down here, so you've got a separate part for this. So this kind of lies over the top, which I think looks really, really nice. I think it gives it a nice little, you know, different kind of look. So if you wanted to make this for a special occasion, I think this is a very good technique. What did I do here? This looks like standard binding, you will say. It isn't. It's the same binding that you've got in your pattern. It's that 4 centimeters wide binding, but I have sewn it to the inside first, understitched it, and then rolled it to the outside. Ingenious? It looks great. It still keeps all of this nice and taut, which is what you want. So you can bend down, you can dance, you can boogie, and you don't have to worry that anything will fall out. Nothing would fall out of this dress anyway, because it's a size too small by now. But you never know, I might fit in it again. Or that exercise I do. Anyway, that is this, and you can see what it looks like when the skirt is a little bit longer. Here I've added 7 centimeters to it. I prefer my skirts actually to be above the knee because I'm rather short and it makes my legs look a little bit longer. That was it. Let's go over to the workshop and have a look at these dresses in a little bit more detail. And here we go. I've got all the fabrics that I've used for sewing here, and this is the wonderful cotton, 100%, then my red polyester, and then I've also got the cotton and lycra mix. It's like 3 to 5%, and then I have got the very stable interlock, and the final one, which I didn't make a dress out of, didn't have enough, is a jacquard knit. It's really fantastic, and it's got a kind of a mesh at the back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to apply some force to these and pull them to kingdom come, so that we can see actually how do the fabrics react to it. So here we got 29 centimeters, and then we can see how much it stretches to, but I mean, really go for it. Give it a really good stretch. And what you can see is what I've talked to you already, is that the 100% cotton does not go back. In fact, it stretches like 4 or 5 centimeters more. I didn't even measure it here. It's like I was so shocked by it. It just doesn't recover, whereas the polyester obviously recovers, and that makes a really huge difference to the size it will come out and everything else. And then the cotton lycra one is the same, it just goes straight back, so that's fantastic. As a single fabric, the interlock will stretch and looks like it doesn't recover quite as much, but if you fold that over in binding, then that will work just fine as well. And as you can see here, the jacquard is fairly stretched, and that is not a great thing. But what jacquard is good in, if you go on the diagonal, it has got more stability. So if you find a fabric like that, you can literally turn in the edges without doing anything to it. It is very stable on the cross, which of course really helps making this dress, so you can just turn in the edges and be done in 20 minutes. So that's a really good tip for you. Now I'm going to do the same to the binding that I've cut all to the same length. I've got my polyester, my cotton and my interlock, and I'm going to give that a jolly good pull. So let's see how that reacts. Really stretch it quite a few times. There we go. And now we're going to see what actually has happened. The polyester, you'll see, is the same length, hasn't stretched. The interlock stretched a little bit, but I tell you, if that's folded in half lengthways, that will not stretch either. And then the cotton has gained 4 or 5 centimeters on that small length. So you can see that if that's just from this one stretch, every time you handle the 100% cotton, it will stretch. Whereas the interlock is kind of like, as a single piece there, it looks like it stretches a bit, but if you did this folded over lengthways, it wouldn't actually stretch. So it's very important on polyester and interlock. You can almost add a few centimeters to the measurement that's in your instructions, and the cotton, you've got a measurement for there in there. And then we've also got the one for the cotton lycra mix, which is the one that I assume that you have, and that's the standard measurement in your instructions. So you should be all sorted. You've got one with low recovery, one with very good recovery, and then for the very high recovery like the polyesters and the interlock, you can always add a few centimeters to make sure that's not too tight. Looking at the red dress in a bit more detail here, you can see how I'm actually not on the edge of my binding. So very important is to always top stitch this from the upper side of the fabric. Otherwise you will have like a wibbly wobbly seam, and that's not what you want, because it's very hard to get it absolutely perfect. Maybe you are perfect, but I am not. So it's much easier to just top stitch it from the top. And here we've got my lovely cotton dress, which stretched so much, and I'm just going to put the polyester dress on top, bearing in mind that this is exactly the same size, and you can see how much bigger the cotton is here. That's a good 5 centimeters, if not 6, if you add both sides together. So we've got about 2.5 at least there. And then the same also happened here. You can see that it's also longer. It has stretched a bit more. So it did come out a whole size bigger than my red dress. I still love it. I mean, I don't mind it being a little bit looser. It's getting hot already here in Los Angeles, so it's quite nice actually. And it looks absolutely beautiful, and you won't have all the trouble that I had making it, because of course I have now adjusted the length of the binding, so it's perfect. The other option I just shown you is to put the binding on. This is not my favorite dress. I don't think the color or anything else really suited me of that. I think the binding is way too wide. You could fold it over again to the outside here and stitch it down so it's a bit slimmer. I think that would look very nice. Or you could simply reduce the binding, and instead of cutting it 4 centimeters wide, just cut it 2.5 centimeters wide and sew it on, and then you have a really nice tiny little bit peeping out, almost like piping. So I would recommend that you play around with this a little bit. I do like using the binding. I just didn't like it in the dark blue and the green, and if you go back and look at me in it, it's not brilliant. So also the back here is kept quite modest. Me personally, I would probably, for a beach dress or going out dress, lower it a little bit in the back as well. And that's this dress. I think it's a very nice technique. I just want to show you something with the pattern. I made it a little bit frumpy. I did cut off all the seam allowances here to avoid that, but to be honest, it still is coming out a little bit too wide on the shoulder seam. So make sure that you really do take that centimeter seam allowance off. And then with the front, I did take a centimeter off, but then I eased it into the size that I had, because I thought, oh, I wanted the coverage. Actually, I really regretted that. So if you take the centimeter off, go all the way down. Don't let it ease in like I did. It made the dress slightly frumpy. So that's not one that I'm gonna wear a lot. Back to my lovely red dress. If I put these on top, you can see they're exactly on the same height. If you don't cut off the seam allowance, it would be way too high. Please bear in mind that my armholes aren't low, they are quite high. So when you are lining it and you are not using any binding for it, I've used this beautiful, very lightweight white knit as my lining, which worked very well. You need to be aware that actually the armhole will stretch a bit. Now, if you don't mind that, that's okay. And here the binding is the same, I already said this, as we do in the dress generally. But I sewed it onto the inside first, and then I rolled it out to the outside and turned it over, and that gave me a very clean finish.
So now I'm going to put on my armhole from the red dress. This is roughly the same size. I mean, okay, it's a size smaller, but it's not vastly different in that area, but you can see that it's way lower. It's, you know, not a size difference. This is like 4 sizes difference almost. I didn't mind that. It still came out above my bra strap, which I think is the most important. So make sure though, if you line it, that you use a stay thread there. And here you can see how I have got this double layer, which is nice. I love it. So you give this some thought, maybe try this technique. Maybe you like it. And finally, this is my favorite dress that I'm going to wear all summer long, and I cannot wait to see what you guys make. Please post it everywhere, tag us on Instagram and here in the academy, show us what you've made. I can't wait to see it.